So, hi everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today for our 12th Revolutionizing Healthcare session. And today's session is on AI and ML for organ transplantation. My name is Nick Maxfield. I'll be moderating today's session, and I handle the Schaar Lab's communications. And we're also joined today by Mihaela, who will be leading the session. And we're joined by 4 clinicians today for our roundtable and who will also be giving presentations. They're Alexander Gimson, Gabriel Oniscu, Martin Caderas, and Mike Nicholson. And I'll be introducing them in a little more detail in a few minutes. Okay, so as mentioned, first, just a little bit of sort of boilerplate, which is a note about continuing professional development credits or CPD credits. So these sessions are eligible for CPD credits under the Royal College of Physicians CPD scheme. So if you're a UK-based clinician, you can now claim CPD credits at the rate of 1 credit per session for participating in these sessions, whether it is joining them live or watching them on YouTube later. But in order to do this, I need to make a short disclaimer to the effect that this is a non-commercial, no-fee event organized by our lab independently from our research sponsors, that we don't have any conflicts of interest, such as financial relationships that would undermine the balance, objectivity, or scientific rigor of these sessions, and that we won't use these sessions to promote products or services, that any mentions of research sponsors will be strictly relevant to the academic content of the session, and we will acknowledge sponsorship whenever such a mention is made. So we do have a little bit of a backlog on these credits at the moment, which we're starting to work our way through. But if you do want to know how to claim credits, please just wait until the end of the session, at which point I will explain it. Okay, but to give you an idea of the purpose of today's session, so as always, our purpose with Revolutionizing Healthcare is to build a shared community and develop a common language between ML and healthcare, and to do this by defining and understanding medical problems through the use of formalisms and by mapping these to AI and machine learning solutions. Our previous 2 sessions focus on the broad theme of getting ML-powered tools into the hands of clinicians, and we illustrated this using a number of demonstrators and real-world case studies. The former of these 2 sessions was from the ICU setting and focused on treatment effect models, and the latter of these was from prostate cancer and looked at clustering and phenotyping models. And these are available on our YouTube channel, so if you do have a moment, I'd highly recommend taking a look at them. Today's session, as I mentioned, is on organ transplantation. And obviously, this is a multifaceted area where we'll cover a number of challenges like survival prediction, matching, and treatment effects. And we will also be showing a demonstrator with some case studies in today's session as well. So to break the session down for you time-wise, after my short introduction, we'll go to a short presentation by Mihaela on some of the themes for this session. And then we'll have a roughly 20-minute presentation by Alexander Gimson on opportunities for AI and machine learning in organ transplantation. And he'll be touching on the importance and complexities and challenges of this particular setting, as well as running us through a short demonstration of the OrganBoard demonstrator that he helped develop with members of our lab and some case studies within that. And then in the latter half of the session, we'll go into our clinician roundtable, for which we have 4 panelists. So many of you are already kind of familiar with this format. But basically, this time it's a little bit different in that we solicited some questions from our audience ahead of time. And many thanks to those of you who've already sent questions through. And we've selected a couple of these that we'll probably touch on in the roundtable. But I also just wanted to point out, if you do have any questions you're just thinking of now, or maybe you see something during the presentations that you'd like to raise a question about, feel free to post it into the Zoom chat. Just make sure that you're not messaging any of us individually so that everyone can see it. And this can happen at any point in the session. It doesn't just have to be during the latter half. In fact, the earlier you share your question, the more likely we'll be able to actually have a proper look at it. And we would like to restrict ourselves to questions from practicing clinicians, if at all possible. And then we plan to wrap up the session at about 5 UK time. So first, I just want to introduce the clinical collaborators and panelists you'll be seeing in today's session. So first up, we have Dr. Alexander Gimson, who's a transplant hepatologist in Cambridge and has worked extensively with our lab, which includes co-developing the OrganBoard tool, the OrganBoard predictive tool and demonstrator we'll be showing later on in this session. So Alex, as I mentioned, will be giving a presentation, but he'll also be taking part in our roundtable. At which point we will also be joined by 3 other clinicians. So we have Gabriel Oniscu with us, He's a consultant transplant surgeon and honorary reader in transplantation at the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh and a clinical director at the Edinburgh Transplant Centre. We have Martin Caderas, who is an associate professor and medical director in heart failure, heart transplantation, and mechanical circulatory support at UC Davis. And we have Mike Nicholson, who's a professor in transplant surgery and head of the Division of Academic General and Transplant Surgery at Cambridge, also director of the NIHR Blood and Transplant Research Unit in Organ Donation and Transplantation. And Alex and Martin are returning guests for Revolutionizing Healthcare, I should point out. So next up, we have a short presentation by Mihaela, as I mentioned. So this is about 5 minutes in total, and she'll be giving a sort of high-level background behind our lab's approach to organ transplantation and some of the themes that will be mentioned in this session. If you do have any questions for Mihaela, please post them into the Zoom chat, and we can hopefully pick up on them later in the session. So Mihaela, whenever you're ready, if you'd like to share your screen.
So thank you very much, Nick, for the introduction. It is such a great pleasure to see so many of you joining us today, and many collaborators in many areas, inclusively transplantation. So I'm really very thankful to you for making the time to be here. Okay, so this particular session represents the third in a row of sessions in Revolutionizing Healthcare, where we are showing tools that we have co-developed with several clinicians, which show the power of machine learning and how they can be used to hopefully change healthcare. Today, we are going to focus on transplantation, but the tools that we present here follow the 4 stages that I have outlined earlier. We started by defining the problems that we are solving together with several of you. And then we went to the modeling board and tried to understand how can we best model the complexity of healthcare and turn it into algorithms and solutions. And this is especially true today because transplantation is a very complex problem with many facets. Then we are currently validating these different algorithms on a variety of data sets. And you are going to see that today we are going to talk about a validation that has happened both in the United States as well as in the UK. And what Alex is going to show to you a little bit later is the demonstrator that we have co-developed, which hopefully will give you a better idea about what we can do in transplantation currently using machine learning methods. Today is, of course, only a short session, so we cannot cover all the different works that we have done over the years in transplantation. Transplantation actually is an area that we have worked for the last 7 years together with a variety of clinicians, starting with Martin Caderas, who is here with us today, and a subsequent set of collaborators, and include machine learning prediction for donor-recipient matching, for treatment effect estimation, etc. If you want to see these various works, please take a look at our website dedicated to organ transplantation. And you are going to see here a variety of works focusing on all these various aspects. Let me just highlight some of the key works on organ transplantation. We started with decision support tools that looked at risk prediction, both risk predictions of patients that have been listed for organ transplantation. And we try to identify really what are the competing risks and what is the progression to disease of the patients that are listed for transplantation, as well as what's an optimal time for such transplantation depending on the risk of that particular patient. We also have looked at risk of patients after transplantation as well. So we looked at both characteristics of patients as well as given a particular type of transplant from a particular type of donor, as well as the time potentially at which the transplantation took place, what is the risk of the patient for side effects or for mortality. So both before transplantation and after transplantation. We also have looked at this problem not only as a risk prediction problem, but also as a problem of individualized treatment effect estimation, and try to identify counterfactuals and what is, again, the best type of moment, as well as the best type of transplant to make. And some of the work that Alex is going to present today is very much related to this area of individualized treatment effects. We also have done quite extensive work in donor-recipient matching. And this is an important problem because often we can decide what type of matching is best for this particular patient, given their unique characteristics, but also given the waiting time for having a different type of organ. These types of decision support tools presented here are non-trivial machine learning methods. They are taking into consideration a lot of complexity, not only because of the fact that we deal with both donors and recipient characteristics, but also because there is a competition for organs and also a competition for resources in general that needs to be considered. These predictions come not only with forecasts as well as potential counterfactual estimation, but also with interpretability and uncertainty estimates. Most recently, we went one step further and tried to understand the difference in clinical decisions, both within a country as well as across countries. So trying to audit the decisions of clinicians and understand them with the overall goal of empowering clinicians and enabling them to make better decisions. And for that, we have built a new set of tools, a new set of machine learning tools that we call quantitative epistemology, whose goal is to understand not the black box of machine learning, but rather the gray cells of clinicians, and try to use machine learning to better understand the decisions that are made, why they are made, and provide additional evidence and support to clinicians. Many of the technologies described here are not going to feature in the discussion today, but if you are interested in learning more about the machine learning technologies that we are building on organ transplantation, we invite you to join our session on January 7 on our sister series dedicated to machine learning for healthcare, where we usually present some of these technologies. Also, I want to say that a lot of the work that we are presenting today in the demonstrator that are based on individualized treatment effect estimation methods. And our lab has played a pioneering role in this area, and it's a complex area. So if you want to listen more about this and learn more about that, we invite you to take a look again at our tutorials on individualized treatment effect estimation. Thank you very much.
Okay, so next up we have our presentation by Alexander Gimson, who was kind enough to record both of these for us. So they're sort of split into two parts. The first one is a general presentation on AI for transplantation, including initial results and future proposals, and touching on some of the collaborative projects that we've had so far. And the next and shorter one is basically a demonstration of the OrganBoard survival prediction tool with some case studies that he and some of our lab members worked on together. And again, if you do have any questions on anything you see, please post them into the Zoom chat, and we'll try and tackle them during the latter half of the session.
Hello, I'm Alex Gimson. I've been a transplant hepatologist in Cambridge, and I'm now working with Mihaela. We're discussing today artificial intelligence and organ transplantation. Why is this an important area? Well, clearly, throughout transplantation, in most transplant jurisdictions, there is a significant disparity between demand for organs and donor organ supply. We think one of the other reasons why this is an important area is because transplantation is a paradigm for the use of scarce healthcare resources. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about organs for transplantation or the use of a scarce resource such as intensive care beds during a pandemic. Some of the principles behind what we're going to be discussing today are entirely relevant to the allocation of any scarce healthcare resource. But why is this a complicated area? Firstly, there is a multidimensional donor and recipient space. There are numerous non-linear interactions and factors within that donor-recipient space. We have to consider counterfactuals, not just what are the outcomes with a transplant, but what are the outcomes if you don't have a transplant, and what are the outcomes for all the people who don't receive the organ in question. And then with the database, there is significant issues of assignment bias and informative censoring. So we've elected to consider two main areas. Firstly, optimal donor allocation. Can we use artificial intelligence to better allocate organs for transplantation? And secondly, to interrogate the area of offer acceptance rates. There's a significant clinical variation between clinicians and between transplant centers in the rate at which a donor organ is offered. And we're interested in whether artificial intelligence can understand some of the reasons why clinicians may on one side say yes, or on another side say no. What we've referred to as quantitative epistemology. There are plenty of other questions which we could be asking, and we will in the future, and would be interested in future collaborations with people in this webinar today on those topics. So just to set the scene, how we allocate organs currently in the United Kingdom is through a national liver offering scheme started in March 2018. Organs are offered on the basis of your net transplant benefit, the difference between your survival with and your survival without a transplant. And we currently use a Cox proportional hazards models. 17 different donor and recipient factors went into the original model. There are interaction terms, and that methodology has significantly reduced our mortality on the transplant waiting list. But there are problems. It doesn't take account of nonlinear terms, it doesn't take account of counterfactual outcomes, and it doesn't take account of informative censoring. So if you were going to design an optimal organ allocation process, we think these are some of the factors you should be considering. First of all, what's the outcome without a donor? What is your predicted prognosis with the specific donor in front of you? How long you might have to wait until you got a better organ, or indeed the optimal organ for you, because the one in front of you may not be the best organ for you. And indeed, what would your mortality be whilst waiting for that better or more optimal donor? And of course, whilst you're waiting, new patients will come onto the list, and they may have a better outcome with the future organs than you do. So that will have an impact on your decision whether to take the organ or to wait for a better one. And indeed, whilst you are waiting, you may also significantly deteriorate. So your ability to survive a transplant may be significantly worse, particularly if you're having to wait significant periods for a relatively rare organ. So we've tried to consider all those different aspects, and we think answered some of them, which I'm going to describe now. So the first model we've described is Organite. This was presented at the NeurIPS conference last year, and this is a balanced score composed of transplant benefit using the standard AI methodology of individual treatment effects, as well as an estimation for each potential recipient of what their optimal donor might be, and the future probability of that donor arriving. How long will it take for you to receive your optimal donor, and what might the impact of that be? Firstly, using individual treatment effects, and I've just showed you one of a number of results here, looking at post-transplant survival at 1 and 5 years, and comparing an individual treatment effects model, that's Orgonite, with Cox proportional hazards, and showing that at 1 and 5 years there is a better C index, suggesting that these are better ways of assessing prognosis. Secondly, with estimating prognosis by individual treatment effects, we've also looked at the concept of donor organ availability and optimal donor probability. So if we examine the case here, which is a donor that becomes available, it is closest to this case here in terms of being optimal, but that case has got a relatively high risk probability of finding a similar or better organ in the future. Whereas this case, although not as good a match, has got a very low probability of receiving an optimal donor, so arguably might be a better candidate to receive this one because they can't afford to wait for a better one. The score tries to take all these factors into account. And this slide just quickly shows some of the results, looking at Orgonite on the right in terms of population life years, deaths on the waiting list, and deaths after transplantation. And on all those three counts, Orgonite is better than allocating by sickest patient first, allocating on the basis of need, best match, allocating on the basis of utility, giving it to the case with the best transplant outcome, or incremental survival, as we currently are transplanting on the basis of transplant benefit. So we have been able to show that with Orgonite, you can develop a methodology which addresses this, and we think has, our preliminary results show, a better outcome. We have also developed that one stage further, looking not just at survival estimations by individual treatment effects and organ density, but also making the model interpretable, and have used a new way of queuing theory to address the future organ availability. I'm not going to show the results of that now. These were published last year. And but that we think is a significant advance because it is an interpretable method. So you can interrogate why the model has identified one patient rather than another patient for the donor in question. So those are our results with organ allocation. And we think they do address at least the first three of these considerations for an optimal organ allocation process. And we hope to develop it in the future further, and we'd be interested in people's thoughts as to how we should go about doing that. I'm going to, in the last few minutes, just address now the whole issue of what we refer to as quantitative epistemology. Can we identify drivers of clinical decisions at a population level and at an instance-wise level, at the level of an individual decision, whether you should or shouldn't use a donor organ with an individual patient? So why is this important? Well, this is a study looking at heart and lung transplantation. This is looking at in the slide in the lung transplants. For every doubling of the organ acceptance ratio, there is a risk-adjusted increase in the number of cases who are transplanted, obviously, but there is a significant reduction in the number of cases dying on the list or are removed from the list because they're too sick. So it's very important we understand why this clinical variation of offer acceptance rates occurs, because it does impact outcomes on a waiting list. Similarly, David Gelberg a few years ago showed the same applies in liver transplantation. For every 5% decrease in the organ acceptance rates, there's a 27% increase in waiting list mortality, even though organs that are declined at the first offer and are subsequently transplanted only have a 4% absolute difference in median 5-year survival. These are good grafts which could have been used. So we have tried to discover which criteria are most important for clinicians at a population level in organ offer acceptance. That's been done previously using logistic regression, but we wanted to see whether we could, as a proof of concept, do the same using an artificial intelligence methodology of inverse learning. And then not just at a population level, but also at the level of a specific patient organ offering sequence, can we identify what were the drivers in specific decisions rather than at a population level? So this slide just shows this in a sort of diagrammatic form and how this might be used in the future. Clearly central to this are doctors who have to make difficult decisions. We think that it might help if those decisions could also be interrogated by a platform which tried to understand what were the drivers for those decisions. And then those could be fed back to decision makers in order for them to think through whether they want to reconsider their decision, and perhaps also to feedback for the future how allocation processes could be optimized. So this slide just shows that at a population level, you can develop AI methodologies, which to the right indicates those factors which are in favor of a positive acceptance, and those factors to the left are those which are in favor of a decline of an offered organ. And as you can see, this is not new. It's been shown in previous studies that the factors, for instance, that impact an offer being declined include donor age, donor weight, whether it's a regional or national donor. This is from US databases, and whether it's a high-risk marginal donor, hepatitis C or hepatitis B positive. So this is a proof of principle that artificial intelligence can interrogate a database and come up with factors which say that an organ might be accepted or might not be accepted. And so the challenge then is to see whether you can use that inverse learning at an instance-wise specific patient donor level. And just to describe that in a bit more detail, here are on the left clusters of patients which have got a relatively low MELD, but no hepatitis, no hepatocellular carcinoma, as to those with a slightly higher MELD. A higher proportion of them were MELD between 20 and 30. And the factors that predicted a positive result were different between the two groups, even though the only thing that was significantly changing is the proportion of potential recipients who had a slightly higher MELD score at the time of their transplant offer. So again, we think this is, and I can't show you all the results in these papers at this stage, but we think these is important preliminary data to show that we can try to use these platforms to help us understand why certain decisions are taken with respect to specific donors and recipients. So all of this work has been presented and worked on by various people in Mihaela's lab. One of the things that I've found most noticeable, which we can discuss in a little bit of time, is that it's by presenting interesting and difficult queries to AI technologists, they have been able to come up with some really impressive techniques, which in turn can help us in the clinical community understand some of our decisions a little bit better. So I'm going to leave it at that at this stage, and happy to take any questions which I know will be coming up on the chat and which people have previously sent through to us. Thank you.
Okay, and then next up, we just have a short additional recording of Alex, and this is basically a walkthrough of the OrganBoard demonstrator and case studies that he co-developed with members of our lab.
I'd like to introduce OrganBoard, which has been developed by both Bogdan and Jeroen from Mihaela's lab. As you can see from this screen, this draft demonstrator will have various sections. One on the left where you can input patient data, in the middle where you can input donor data, and then it will demonstrate to you survival both with and without a transplant. And the difference between the two curves, obviously, is the net transplant benefit. Below that on the right, we've also got some of the other usual scores that people are using in these circumstances. As you can see here, you've got a 60-year-old patient with alcoholic liver disease with a bilirubin of only 20 and no encephalopathy or ascites. And the net transplant benefit for that patient is relatively low. If now we increase the bilirubin to 200, as you can see, the net transplant benefit, the difference between the two curves, the mortality on the waiting list and the mortality on the post-transplant becomes significantly greater. And indeed, the transplant benefit score calculated by proportional hazards also increases. At the same time, you can look at the impact of changes to the donor. So if we increased the donor age to 60 and the donor BMI to 35, then you can see that there is a small change in the post-transplant survival. So the net benefit is slightly lower. A third point we'd like to demonstrate here is we are offering some donor predictions, both the probability of finding a similar donor to the one that we've just put the data in for, as well as an optimal donor for the patient in question. A figure of 5% for the optimal donor means that 5% of future donors will be showing optimal characteristics for the patient in question. This OrganBoard is currently in development. It's currently in its draft format, and we hope to add additional features to it, which we will be able to share with people as those developments are introduced.
Right, so now it's time for the latter half of the session and our clinician roundtable. So I've already introduced our four panelists, but just once again, we have joining us Alexander Gimson, Gabriel Oniscu, Martin Caderas, and Mike Nicholson. So I believe first of all, before we actually kind of get to some of the questions we received from our audience, Mihaela has a couple of questions from for our panelists, and I believe they haven't been told what they are in advance, so these will sort of be a little bit on the spot, somewhat excitingly. So Mihaela, if you want to go ahead and I guess get some of these questions for our panelists started, that would be great.
Yes, so thank you very much again for joining us. So Gabi, my first question is to you. You have, of course, a lot of experience and expertise in this area of transplantation. And I know that you have considered artificial intelligence as a solution for some of these challenges. We want to ask you, what do you think about what we have done? And what do you think that are important things we need to consider moving forward? What else would you like to see?
I don't think I've got enough time to go through all those answers to your very open questions, Mihaela, because the sky is the limit here. I think for me, there are a couple of key points. First of all, I think we need to consider this as a risk discussion with the patient at any given offer. I think this is key because in the shared decision-making process, that's very important. It's very important to inform the patients about options and the fact that they may or most likely not be able to wait for the ideal organ because that ideal organ doesn't exist. Secondly, I think I would challenge you that some of the concepts may all become obsolete already. We are beginning to modify the quality of the organs. So their OrganBoard that Alex has shown may require rapid modifications, because you're not talking about DCD or DBD only. There are other factors that come in. And thirdly, is we looking at all this from a principle of clinicians. What does it mean in terms of maximizing the organ utilization? So the key point is, are we trying to address an issue at individual patients, or are we trying to do that whilst also maximizing the utilization of the organs? Because currently a number of organs are discarded. Who are those organs best suited for? And the final point is, we need to consider what the patient wants. So the quality adjusted life, the patient-reported outcomes will need to come into a much more difficult allocation and conceptualization of what AI can offer.
Thank you very much. Lots of food for thought and discussions. So let me now turn to Martin. So Martin, it is due to you that I started to look at transplantation around 7 years ago. And I recall many discussions with you about the challenges, and some of the early work that we have done was due to you. How do you see so many years later this area? What are your thoughts about what AI can do, and how what we have done back then do you think still stands, and what do you see as new challenges and new opportunities?
Thank you, Mihaela. And really, I mean, I think it's great seeing, I mean, we came with just one question. I think you turn it into such a beautiful project and really meaningful, right? What it means to patients and to the individual patients, because all these problems that we see, I mean, this is what we constantly have seen. I mean, whenever we sit on those selection meetings, I mean, those are very, very difficult decisions. And I've been in larger programs and smaller programs, and when there is consensus, when your decisions are supported by peers that also have like experience, is one thing. When you're by yourself in a smaller group in a smaller hospital, where your outcomes are going to be penalized by a system that doesn't admit errors, then it becomes very understandable why a lot of organs are discarded, and why I mean, programs tend to be more conservative in certain, which is so I think, I mean, one of the powerful things, because whenever you give me this tool, right, in a large center, say, well, I mean, that is really adds to what we already know, right? Because we do this, we have a large experience, and then we're doing this every day, and then we become very good at being able to predict who's going to do well and who's not going to do well. However, we can always make that better, and that we have seen over the years. We're able just to take more risk, right? Better identify the patients that could really benefit, and many identify patients that may be too risky, or the donors that might be too risky. So certainly being able just to incorporate also the change in practice, right? So one thing was when we were making predictions and trusting publications that been based on historical data. And then what we see today, when, you know, an allocation system has changed last year, right? So it's completely changed the field. So adapting to that. And then one thing is, again, whenever you're with a large community, stronger support, academic support, resources, and other things when you're in a smaller and with more limited resources. So I think the impact is great. I mean, specifically for patients, I think what you have done and what this team and I can see that now by multiplying what you're doing, I mean, can be done. I think it's wonderful. I mean, try to perfection. Again, there's no ideal donor, but I mean, it's how we can make the best decision. And I think that is so important. And then how also we can make these decisions like in a more informed way, rather than like what we think is the ground truth, right? Like a lot of time we stick to that and we think of this for years, and we are resistant to change the pattern that we think. And I think this opens up, I mean, how we think, right? It's the new way of thinking. I think the new clinician is going to incorporate this more and more and use this as support, right? It's not like always the algorithm is by itself, but it's just, I mean, now you have a powerful tool to be able just to make that decision you can feel just more confident. How that is for your patient and also in your hands, right? What's happening in your center and centers like you, right? And what is today with the latest information that we have available, the latest technologies, etc.
Thank you, Martin. Mike, I'm now turning to you to ask you, you are in the end the surgeon that is performing these complex surgeries. And to some extent, these are only tools that would provide some type of analysis, some type of counterfactuals. What happens if you would do this or that type of surgery or at particular moment in time with this organ or another organ, and what will happen post-surgery. How do you see this type of tools, and what else would you like to see to enable you and empower you?
So the first thing's two things to say. Congratulations on the work that you and your team and Alex have done so far, because I think it's fantastic. The second thing is that I do kidney transplantation, and these, don't tell anybody, but these operations aren't that complicated, are they, Gabby? Actually, it's it's only joining tubes together. So I think this has got tremendous potential to basically try and address the remaining problems in kidney transplantation, of which there are three important ones, I think, which is first that although the early results of transplantation are really quite impressive, after the first year, there's a gradual attrition in graft loss, which is largely due to chronic antibody-mediated damage. The second problem, of course, is that these fantastic results are only achieved because patients have to have immunosuppression for the rest of their life. And that immunosuppression is given in a blunderbuss, blanket way. We need to develop bespoke immunosuppression. Then the third thing is, of course, the massive mismatch between supply and demand in organ transplantation. So to give some specifics, I was just interested, one of the things we're very interested in is utilization. It's really important because there are vast differences in the utilization of a particular organ, particularly marginal organs throughout the country. And there are human factors involved in that. So you've worked on donor and recipient factors, but I think that AI could also be used to try and understand the decision-making of individual clinicians and then hopefully moderate their, or change their behavior. And I think, there's all sorts of things you could look at. It'd be interesting to know particularly how staffing levels and the time of day and the experience of the surgeon affected all these decisions. I'd be very interested, I'm always interested in declines. We have this idea of somebody declines an organ and somebody else uses it. And we then say the first lot made a mistake. And that's not necessarily the case because the organ may have gone to a more appropriate recipient. And I think AI could be used to look at the outcomes and try and unpick whether the correct decision was made the first time. And then I also, because I'm very interested in living related, we have a whole load of patients who we work up and they've got a potential living donor, which is fantastic, but there are all the downsides of somebody undergoing an operation they don't need. And then they are offered a DCD kidney. So I think you could use this technology to see whether whether they should take the DCD kidney or if they should wait for the living related. And I mean, I could go on. I think the other areas are, we're very interested in machine perfusion. We measure all sorts of parameters on the machine that tell us about the quality of the kidney. AI could really help us with that. Bespoke immunosuppression, I think, is really important. And then finally, my colleague, Vasilis Kosmiliapsis, has developed a microfluidics antibody affinity assay, which basically it allows for the first time the measurement of both the concentration of an antibody but also its affinity, and you don't need to immobilize the antigen to do that, so it can be done in solution. And what he's planning to do with that is there's lots of patients who have mismatches, but some of them are for antibodies that are not very high affinity, and we could delist those and therefore increase the chances of that patient getting a transplant. And I think that again, this machine learning and AI would be very helpful in trying to unpick all of that. So
Mike,
Gabby's right, the sky's the limit.
Yes, so Mike, just very briefly, sorry to respond. So there are actually two areas that you mentioned that already some of the work we have done. So you mentioned work in which potentially there is no destination therapy, but there may be something intermediate or an alternative type of organ being given. We have looked in the past together with Martin for heart transplantation at LVADs. as alternative to heart transplantation, and the advantages and disadvantages for different classes of patients. So machine learning technology exists for that. Of course, how useful it would be for the specific scenario in kidney that you mentioned, we do not know. But at least the technology has been developed for heart transplantation, where these alternatives exist and these intermediate technologies exist. And for you were mentioning trying to understand the decisions of clinicians and understanding the factors that have mattered. This is what Alex was talking about when he talked about quantitative epistemology, but that's a quite complex new area that we are building machine learning for. So maybe we will take it in a subsequent Revolutionizing Healthcare session and discuss it in more detail, because indeed how to understand and disentangle these different forces, whether it is the patient themselves having a particular, let's say, requirement or desire, or the clinician taking into consideration a variety of factors that may lead in denying this organ, rejecting this organ, but not for another patient. I think, again, technology is there in its premature form, but I think it requires clinicians like you all to engage with us to perfect this technology and make it truly useful for you.
So I think in a minute, we're going to go to some of the questions that we received in the session chat, but I noticed that Gabriela has his hand up. So I thought, yeah.
Yeah, very briefly. Thanks, Nick. Mihaela, I think the point of AI, what it does over what we've done for the last 20 years, is the ability to look at a multitude of factors that at the moment we don't take into account. You talked about comorbidity of patients. This is a dynamic process. The model that Alex has shown in terms of donor and recipient, it's still fairly fixed. What about the modifiable factors such as cold ischemic time? Because you then offer the organ to someone else that accrues more time, it may diminish the benefit and so on. So the beauty of AI is looking at the multitude of factors that at the moment are not accounted for to refine that prediction on an individual patient basis. And that's what we want to see on a clinical decision level.
Lovely. So Mihaela, should I go to some of the questions that we got in the chat first, and then we'll get around to some of the ones that were pre-submitted. So the first one that we got in the chat, at least, was from Stephen. Stephen, if you're able, would you mind unmuting and, yeah, camera on? Fantastic. Thank you very much. And then please go ahead.
Hi, thanks. I hope you can hear me. My name's Steve Pettit. I'm a transplant cardiologist. I work at Papworth Hospital. It's been a fantastic and really interesting 45 minutes for me. I'm totally convinced that transplant benefit is a better way of thinking about, donor and recipient allocation than a lot of what we're doing at the moment. But the outcome measure that we're looking at are life years gained. And I guess my question is, are all those life years equivalent? Or do you think we should be looking at life years differently depending on, I don't know, the age of the recipient or their anticipated quality of life and so forth?
Alex, this is a question for you.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. That's a really great question. And the answer is that, of course, on the majority of databases that we have, the only thing we have is crude survival. But you're right. Quality adjusted life years would be, one of many, many different options which we could include. There are enormous difficulties, as I'm sure you're aware, in how you account for the quality of a life year. I mean, it has to be the quality of the individual patient rather than some objective quality, because it's how people perceive their own quality of life rather than how we may perceive their quality of life. That's crucial. And I don't think at the moment databases are collecting that enough. But, there's no question. I think we will do that, notwithstanding there'll be the big issues that it will raise in how we collect the data.
Martin has his hand up, so I thought maybe we throw it to him next.
Yeah, actually, he just Alex just mentioned those things. I think, one is just, it seems like there should be a measure of meaningfulness of that transplant that might be beyond the variables, but also is the limitation of the databases that we have. And I think that's another thing that we have tested. We rely a lot of old data systems, like, for example, on our side, the UNOS data system, but now like systems more advanced, like Epic, I think we'll need just to start seeing, I mean, where we move in order just to be able just to improve this machine learning algorithms. I think machine learning algorithms are great, but we don't give the knowledge also. It's hard just to improve that. So I think that needs to change, and it's happening, I believe.
Can I just mention? I think it's not. I mean, this is not just a measure of outcome, of course, but both, but not just, and maybe also quality of life, but patient-reported health status. There's good data that which we're not including at the moment also has a significant impact on both mortality on a waiting list, but also post-transplant mortality. And I think Will Bernal may be on this call, and he's recently published on that. So I mean, looking at all those patient specific parameters is going to be important, rather than just our crude database ones that we have at the moment.
Okay, so shall we move on to the next of our questions that were submitted during the session, which I believe comes from Jazz Palmer. Jazz, if you're able, would you mind going ahead and asking?
Great. Thank you very much, Nick, and thank you, the panel. Fantastic, stimulating talks, which shine a light on a very dark area. I've worked in this area for 25 years, and some of this is really opening my eyes to things. And the question I had was really about the queuing system. Is that sensitive enough to the patient's trajectory? I.e., if the patient joins the queue at a certain point, but has a quite a rapid decline in their clinical well-being, is the algorithm sensitive enough to respond to that? And if I might just ask one other question, which is really related to what Gabby was talking about, which is how do we incorporate new technologies into it when there's going to be little data available to allow judgments around that. So I'd just be interested to hear what people's thoughts around those two things were.
Yes, if you allow me, thank you so much for the questions. If you allow me, I'm going to start to answer the questions first from a machine learning perspective, and then I'll let Alex jump in. So the current algorithm is not sophisticated enough in terms of the queuing. I completely see your point, how the trajectory of disease of a patient will matter here. And as you may have seen in our Revolutionizing Healthcare session last time, in the last one, we talked about trajectories and trajectories of disease and how we can learn from data trajectories of disease and phenotypes and what events we expect them to see. Such data, unfortunately, we do not have such data for transplantation. I'm sure it exists, but we have not been able to use it. We use databases that are containing relatively few measurements. But if such information would be available, for instance, in the case of cystic fibrosis, so our lab has done quite a lot of work on cystic fibrosis, where there are longitudinal measurements and we can build trajectories and trajectories of disease. In that case, looking at cues, but also looking at the effect of the longitudinal effect of the disease on the patient, the competing risks, and what would maybe optimal time for transplantation becomes a very important issue. And that is not only for the particular patient, but also for the other competing patients, if you like, that are competing for the same resources. Are they expected to deteriorate much faster, much slower? So all of that, I think, from a technology point of view, we have. So the previous session showed these trajectories of disease. And I think we can unify that with the queuing system. We have not done so, but I think that this can be done. It's pushing the boundaries, I think, of machine learning as well as operations research, but I think it can be done. We have not done it though, and we do not have the data, but if given the data, it would be a very exciting new project. About what both you and Gabi said related to how to incorporate new data. I think that this is especially an advantage of machine learning, because you can relatively easily, if you have the data, like Martin said, we need to have the data to be able to do that. But if we have the data, we can try to assess the value of information and what information will be most useful for what type of patient and potentially for what type of decision. And we can decide whether this newly acquired information should indeed lead to potentially different recommendations, different estimation of risk or competing risks both prior to transplantation as well as after transplantation. And what I think it's exciting with machine learning models is that not only we look at the population level, but also at subclasses of patients. So as Gabriel rightly said, I understand it's clearly important to look at patients with different types of comorbidities. In the case of heart failure and heart effects, we have looked quite a lot at diabetic patients that are also suffering from heart failure. And clearly their trajectory is very different than patients who are not diabetics. So I think that understanding sources of information and the value of information for predictions for subclasses of patients is something that machine learning can do. However, we need data and we need guidance from you, the clinicians, as to what are pertinent questions and how we can carefully use the data to answer questions correctly and usefully for you and your patients. I don't know, Alex, if you want to also answer Ya's question. Sorry.
I think your points are really important. I mean, I think there will be newer ways of queuing. That's really important. I think the more time series analyses or newer methods of time series analysis are also going to be really important. This is vital for liver transplantation because of recent changes in the management, for instance, just hepatitis C. So I think all those factors are going to be very important, and they will hopefully be coming in newer editions of these platforms. Just to answer Jazz, your specific question on the chat, Organite was taking all cases irrespective of their severity, just as a proof of concept. At a later stage, we will then divide those up into super urgent and elective cases and interrogate them separately.
And I noticed, Gabriel, you have your hand up, so please go ahead.
Yeah, just to sort of touch on something that Mihaela has spoken about, the comorbidity. I think one of the challenges with the current algorithm is the time horizon we're taking to make the prediction. And Alex has shown you 1 in 5 years, but is this the right thing to do? And I think the advantage of the machine learning is that we can look in a different way. And I would challenge everyone here that potentially with the scarcity of donors, we need to look at 1 transplant for life. And that's what we need to achieve. Now, how do we define the optimal graft survival or the life expectancy of a particularly given graft versus specific life expectancy of the patient? That is a challenge. And also, the longer the time horizon, the impact of comorbidity will be different. There will be different conditions affecting early survival versus late. And I think that's where the next challenge will come in refining this particular model.
Just to respond to Gabby there, although I only showed you data for 1 in 5 years, that was deliberate. In fact, Organite is making the calculation on the basis of unlimited outcome.
Okay, so I think we probably have time for about 2 more questions. I think one of which we will source from the chat again, and then one of which will come from Carsten Niemann, who submitted his question in advance and has joined us so that he can ask it. So the first of these is the one we just received in chat, which is from Benoit. So Benoit, if you are able, would you mind unmuting yourself and putting yourself on camera so we can see you as you ask your question?
Hi, I'm one of the transplant surgeons in Edinburgh, and I was quite interested in finding out do we have any algorithm that accounts for all the live donor liver transplants that happen in the eastern part of the world, where some of the surgeons have actually done 3,000, 4,000, at least 3,000 live donor liver transplants, and that's a huge number. And into the future, I think without that, I'm not sure where we go with the AI part of things. Thank you.
So I'm not sure, Alex, I think you understand better where the question is coming from.
Yeah, I'll answer, I can answer that, but the answer is no, we've not included live donor liver transplantation. But if there was an appropriate database then of course, that it would be a really interesting study, and to look at comparisons between live donor and cadaveric donation. But we've not used that so far, because that's not available in such enormous numbers out of the UK or the UNOS database.
Okay, fantastic. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Mihaela.
Let me just very briefly, so maybe to answer another point of view. So I think that from a machine learning point of view, it will be both challenging, but also exciting to understand what can we learn from different databases and from different parts of a country, across country. So this whole area of, can machine learning extract insights that are useful not only locally or even at the level of a country, but can be transplanted, if I may use this word, across different healthcare systems and help each other, such that hopefully you can learn from each other and hopefully you can get better together, and how machine learning and data can help distill insights. Because we do know that, at least in United Kingdom, there are different decisions made based on different kind of insights than in United States. And even in United States, there are many transplantation centers with very different types of policies. So I think that's an opportunity with machine learning, hopefully, to distill better insights and to learn from the collective intelligence of all of you for the specific case in front of you.
Lovely. Okay, I'm going to add Carsten now. Carsten was kind enough to share a question ahead of the session, and we asked him to join us to ask it in person. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Nick. And just a disclaimer, I'm a hematologist. Thus, the question about live transplants is much more easy from our perspective. But my question would be, how can I actually tell whether a specific patient would benefit from a transplant rather than from a conservative approach, saying acute myelogenous leukemia, where we actually know that patients will lose some life years due to transplant-related mortality early on, but on the long run, they usually benefit from the transplant. So it's really building both on the questions about incorporating more data and in terms of quality of life data and modeling this very complex space.
Alex, again, I think this is
let me
question for you.
Carsten, I think that's a really interesting question. So I think AI can help us understand that a little bit better. I mean, one has to look at all the different options available. What are the outcomes? And then, as Gabby said, what are the very long-term outcomes in your particular case with the transplant option, as opposed to what are the very long-term outcomes with other more conservative measures. I think you can, by undertaking individualized treatment effects, interrogate that more accurately than we could in the past. So I do think the methodologies could have a real benefit. I think there's a sort of, your question also opens up an interesting area for, let's say, organ transplantation as well, because it raises the issue of upstream of actually getting on a waiting list. All the databases we are using at the moment include people who are actually selected on the waiting list. This begs the whole question of what should you be doing in the 1 or 2 years before they actually arrived on the database, and where there will be a lot of, and even more, alternative therapies for them. And what are all those outcomes with those different alternative therapies, rather than going early for a transplant, which has all the inherent risks but potential long-term benefits.
Martin, I believe your hand is up.
Yeah, I think this is a great question, because I mean, also make us just to think, I mean, whenever we think about risk, right? What risk means and what it means for each patient or each patient group. Like, for example, patients that are highly sensitized post-transplant, they tend just to be rejected. So then we reject organs because of the sensitization, but the risk of receiving a sensitized donor probably is much smaller than the risk of dying from end-stage organ disease, and the outcomes in the longer term are reasonable. The other way happens the other way around. Patients that probably were thought that were higher risk, and then they could have done well with medical therapy. So I think that comes on the waitlist mortality, and I think this is a very important topic that still need to be addressed, but also has a big impact because a lot of patients are not done because of that perceived risk, which should be the ideal risk, but the risk should be tailored to each individual patient as well.
And just to follow up, I think that's really important, the individual survival probabilities for patients on contrafactual treatment. So really think that should be something where you could motivate you, Mihaela, to have your group working on that perspective.
Karsten, to some extent, I'm not sure how clear was here, but we are computing these different counterfactuals. And even these different counterfactuals could be computed given alternate therapies, potentially, So the best example is that comes from our past work with looking at LVAD versus nothing versus a real heart surgery. That was an example that we have looked in the past. But I think methods got better. Our collaborations with clinicians like you got better. So now we understand the complexity of the problem more. I also want to say that these machine learning methods are only as good, not only as the data we feed them, but also the type of questions and know how you help us feed into this. So I'm tremendously thankful to Martin and to Alex, who over the years have engaged with us, because this area of transplantation is very, very complex for machine learning. It's not just risk prediction, as many of you have shown. There are all these different facets. And this is why, from a machine learning point of view, it's exciting. Many of my students want to work in transplantation because of all these complexities. But on the negative side, there are many challenges, and unless you are helping us understand them and model them correctly, we can only do so much. So we thank you very much for engaging with us.
Okay, so I think that's pretty much the last question that we had time for in today's session. Obviously, I'd love to thank all of our panelists for joining us today, giving up their time. I know, obviously, they have a lot on their schedule, so thank you all so much. And just before I go, a couple quick notes about upcoming sessions. Okay, so as Mihaela mentioned, we do have an inspiration exchange session on organ transplantation coming up in January 2022. So as Mihaela mentioned, this is basically the sister series for Revolutionizing Healthcare, where the focus is maybe a little bit more on the machine learning side of things. So we will probably go into quite a lot more depth about the actual specific models and methods, and you'll be able to hear from some of our lab's researchers themselves on these. Additionally, basically, we have another, here we go. We have a session coming up in February 2022, where we will be featuring a number of leading voices from the medical community on the future of AI and machine learning for healthcare. Please stay tuned for details on that. I'll follow up by email to all of you as we nail down some of the speakers and some of the details for this session. If you do want to catch this session again, you can catch it on YouTube, probably within a few days or a week at most. And one thing I just wanted to draw your attention to, because I thought you might be interested in, is our lab held the 2021 open house in October. And this was initially a closed event for some of our sponsors and supporters. But of particular interest at that session, we showed 10 very high level, very short talks on a very wide range of topics, which includes organ transplantation, among a number of others. And these are now available to be watched on demand. So all you need to do to have a look at those is to go on our lab's website. It should just be at the very top of the page. It says open house. Just click on that, and there's basically 10-minute YouTube videos. Again, very high level. I think a really good introduction to a number of projects that our lab is involved with, or a number of our areas of work. Also, just a quick point about future Revolutionizing Healthcare sessions, since I noticed that quantitative epistemology and understanding and empowering decision-making came up as a theme several times in this session. We will be hoping to hold another Revolutionizing Healthcare session on that particular topic, and we'll keep you up to date on that as well as we approach it. Lastly, just a quick note to those who would like to claim CPD credits for attending these sessions. All you really need to do is drop me an email at the address that you see here on the screen. Just tell me which sessions you've attended and how you attended them, whether you attended them live or whether you watched them on YouTube. Again, you can get credits for both. And I will then put together a CPD certificate, which I will send to you, and you can submit your application for CPD credits on the Royal College of Physicians website. And in the meantime, if you do have any friends or colleagues that you think might be interested in these sessions, please do let them know, because obviously we're trying to build a community. That's one of the aims of these sessions. So word of mouth is incredibly important to us in doing this. Lastly, I'd like to just thank our panelists again for taking the time to join us for a wonderful session, and also to the many of you who shared your questions with us, both ahead of and during the session. Thank you all so much. I really look forward to seeing you next time. In the meantime, please take care, stay safe, and see you soon. Thank you all very much.